Walnut Manhattan. By 1934, Winston Hugh Auden's poetry was becoming almost critic-proof, tobacco, gin and vermouth soaked, thick as his puckered walnut shell skin and his much-lauded name, Lauded Auden, cod Icelandic cloth-bound brand. His impermeable reputation had been pre-stamped with posterity. Few poets experience such apotheosis while still alive. And consolidated in the 1937 new verse published in tribute to his dog-eared genius, contributors numbering Louis MacNeice, Edgell Rickword, and one young green pseudo-surrealist called Dylan, pronounced Dullan. Thomas, who said of the Birmingham-made marbleized effigy in his lofty 30th year, "I sometimes think of his poetry as a great war, admire intensely the mature, religious and logical fighter, and deprecate the boy bushranger." Then spiked his tribute with a sardonic aftertaste. "P.S. Congratulations on Auden's 70th birthday." So historied as the name Auden already sounded, particularly to those up-thrusting new apocalyptic poet striplings whose talents had barely ripened under the Audenic gaze of the Brummie master. That Auden-sounding name that sounded as if it had always been there, insinuated in the aural atmosphere, long before the old soul was born to occupy its scooped-out casing. And so it was not such an audacious leap to anticipate he'd already reached his 70, if not in actual figures, then figuratively speaking. Not all tributes were without criticism. Apotheosized poets have apostles, but also apostates. George Barker's contribution was to discern in the verse of the pedagogic Brummagem bard a clumsy interrogatory finger questioning me about my matriculation certificate, my antecedents, and my annual income. With such boisterous and bolshy crooked-tied schoolboy recalcitrance, Barker furthered that he also sensed a sort of general conspiratorial wink being made behind my back to a young man who sometimes has a name Christopher, sometimes Stephen, sometimes Derek, and sometimes Whiston, expressing his dislike of this detectable snobbery of clique, but providing the rear guard to Auden's quadrangle hydra of talents. The only name not cited by Barker, Cecil, paid tribute to his peer and mentor. No contemporary writing shows so clearly the revulsion of the artist from a society which can no longer support him, his need to identify himself with a class that can provide for his imagination. Cue the oak-panelled Oxford communism percolated at a corner of Peckwater Quad where sage Auden held court, while equally well-educated Edgell Rickword couldn't resist taking a chip at the eponymous benefactor of so much Audenic hagiography, writing of his poetry in an essay, Auden and Politics, the subject entitled Backhanded Compliments. The feeling of insecurity that afflicts a section of the middle classes as a ceaseless concentration of capital into fewer hands undermines their comparatively privileged position, one which Rickword also occupied. Skelton, in retrospect, noted an earthier, chthonic tonic key in Auden's oeuvre. Some poems, at once explicitly sociological and deeply personal, invoke nature as a restorer, not of repose, but of strength and fecundity. And here were the seeds of Laurentian vitality, sown deep in the long-ploughed furrows of Auden's painstakingly cracked face. John Fuller's dedication to Auden's oeuvre was thickly bound 3 decades later, A Reader's Guide to W.H. Auden, Thames and Hudson, a compendious companion to the 30-odd titles up to 1970, comprising 20 volumes of verse, 3 plays, 3 film scripts, 4 librettos, and 3 musical accompaniments, one a song cycle, obsessively catalogued and criticised, warts and all appraised. Fuller wasn't shy of picking up on Auden's less lauded flaws and contradictions, all expressed in present tense, since the subject was still existent and contemporaneous when it was written, though, as with the poor and the rich, Auden, as always with us, is somehow immanent as the timelessness of his Icelandic name. Auden is frighteningly at ease with ideas, and likes occasionally to both tease and hector his readers. He is not often emotionally demonstrative in his poetry, and is one of the most challengingly adroit versifiers there has ever been. Auden was as self-possessed as his landscape-shaping name. Auden was simply Auden, authentic article of his own manufacture, begat of himself. He has been his own kind of Laurentian, his own kind of Marxist, and his own kind of Anglican. Almost an afterglow to his guru and publisher of Faber and Faber, the mystically initialed supreme template, T.S. Eliot, poet archimandrite, his own kind of Carlist and his own kind of Anglo-Catholic. Both poets, too, were enshrined as Anglo-Americans. Eliot for having emigrated to England from America, and Auden for having done the reverse, naturalised across the pond to be with Chester Coleman, his golden-haired apprentice, cohabiting in a sprawling apartment where blue smoke curled up past white wood panelling behind a facade of Brooklyn brownstone. Later, they flighted and alighted in Austria. Both initial poet titans were the poem supermen of their respective generations. Eliot more drawn to the Teutonic, Siegfried, and German Volk. Auden to obscure Nordic roots, the Scandinavian traditions, the dread of the Danish, Kierkegaardian angst towards his age of anxiety in the 40s, or marking his progress from saga to high table. Tongue-bound to Yggdrasil, eyes upwardly gazing to the vaults of Valhalla, from a drafty station platform waiting room in the home counties, doilies, whistling kettles, Valkyries of shaking china, kaolinite, and nicotine teapots. Auden was, it seemed, a creature of phases, an amorphous shapeshifter, never wholly committed to any of his donned prosopods of the moment. Yet each sported a patina apparently authentic on closer inspection, signatured with craftsmanly verisimilitude of fake antiques. 1933 was, to Fuller's mind, Auden's great year for discarded neo-Marxist work, a year in which Lawrence seems to have been put behind him, and a year of some artistic turmoil and choice of direction. One might well have expected a more decisive move towards a religious position, viz. Eliot. And for the remainder of the 30s, Auden's energies in the following half-dozen years were to a great degree technical. In ideas he stood fairly still. We know it now to have been only a phase, just as the early oblique poetry of a disappointed love and the middle Rilkean period of historical analysis was a phase. And so, America would also prove a phase, one as ice-cubed Bourbon brown as a Walnut Manhattan, with burnt orange tints of Angostura bitters, or reined-in balconies, watered ashtrays.